Hello world of YouTube, and welcome to a discography review that won't take me long to get through, but I've honestly been putting off doing for 4 years. It is a look on a group that is iconic for how well they fuse post-punk and new wave and reggae inspirations to create a harmony that is the electrifying, if not sometimes, chaotically so energy that is Andy Summers on guitar, Stuart Copeland on drums, and Sting on bass and vocals that make up the English trio, The Police. A band who I love not only just for the music that they've made, but the impact they've had even immediately in the vein of being an inspiration to bands like Rush. The Police, for how brief they were around, really did leave a last on the general populace when it came to helping get the 80s going, considering they bowed out as the decade really started to take off. 5 albums of magic that I'll be ranking from least to most favorite and giving you a roadmap for getting into a band who, admittedly, in my opinion, isn't all that hard to get into if you like the sounds they have going on. The barrier of entry is more their sounds and cocktail than it is the music itself if you get past that. And I only say that because my mom hated this band growing up. I always really dug their core sound. I mean, again, obviously I like some of the stuff that they've inspired, but like iconic smashes like Roxanne and Don't Stand So Close to Me, and Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. Every single record of theirs at least has a couple smash hits that were huge in the 80s, and I think that the records themselves are a further artistic dive that I think is worth it if it's your bag. That's really all the kind of setup I got out of the way. Let's go ahead and rank their albums by starting with Now, I knew, regardless of what album I put on the bottom, I was going to piss off some sect of the Police fandom, because, I mean, again, their 5-album discography is just consistent as hell. Even Outland's D'Amour, I'd say, is really a 7 out of 10 experience. It'd be an 8 out of 10 if Be My Girl Sally wasn't there, while sort of, like, having nuggets of sounds that the Police would do into, and giving a tease for, like, the odd tangents the band could potentially go to, and does go to, on some of their records. It sticks out like a sore thumb on this debut because everything else around that is just vacuum sealed and tight. The guitars and bass have this great groove together. The bass and drums are also just an equally great pairing, regardless of if they're going into the more post-punk inspired realms like the sort of a kinetic opener Next to You, which sets the stage of Sting's love of dramatics lyrically, and romance that sort of permeates throughout this record, and glorious splendor that sort of gets further channeled throughout some youthful realms, and while still creating some emotional weight, like on Peanuts or Truth Hits Everybody. I like that out the gate. Not only do they have Next to You igniting the record, they pair that with 2 more reggae-inspired jams that still have their ramp-ups to these large crescendos, like So Lonely, and what is easily the biggest song on this album, Roxanne. A pairing of sort of the call out into the night for someone to be your company, with Roxanne being the one to answer the call, which then devolves into the conversation that happens throughout Roxanne, the iconic Police jam. 2 being songs that also introduce their love of reggae into the phrase, something that also gets further sort of fleshed out throughout the veins of Can't Stand Losing You, and some of the evolution of the explosive closer, Masoko Tangs, a song that, similarly to tracks like Roxanne, build to this great flourish of an outro, has the more stage-smashing, all-out finale that you would expect from a record with this kind of carnal energy coursing throughout some of the energetic portions on here. The bass play on this album is top-notch, especially on some of the more crazy moments throughout the closer. But, like, there's some real pockets that Sting's riding in on a bass that blend those loves of punk and reggae masterfully. Stewart's drums are just incredible. Andy's guitars really cut through some of those dub and punk ideas and add some energy to the mix as well. I really like this record. Again, it's on the bottom because they've just got a stacked discography. However, I would also say in the same breath, this might be the best starting point to get into the Police because it does have, like, the basis for their sound that they would then branch off to in more interesting ways from here. And just, again, a tight, beautiful harmony that I think still dazzles now and holds up masterfully so. This also feels like their most A to B record, considering the themes of love and lust and yearning that course throughout the track listing. There's an A and B conversation going on throughout the lyrics on here that I think keeps this record tight amidst the unity that the band is trying to bring out in a Genesis here. Which, again, considering where their conflicts maybe deviate, it's nice to see in a unified Genesis that just rips. Ironically enough, similar to Outland's D'Amour, I could see people still sticking up for Zenyatta Mandata, the middle child in the Police's discography, just as intensely. It, similarly to that, feels like an A to B type experience when it comes to, like, delivering a mood and carrying the listener throughout that mood. It also acts stylistically as a turning the page moment. The band sort of adapting more into a love of new wave and synth ambience with their reggae influence, with some energy still being present, but not quite as post-punk feeling as the two records prior. Which isn't a bad thing. I do think that it is an interesting direction for them to take that led to them making two records after this that not only sort of build upon it more interestingly, but also provide a handful of different emotions that I think make for a more well-rounded experience. While there's a myriad of topics explored throughout Zenyatta Mandata that all tie around this core theme of somewhat seediness and disgust and sort of an undertrodden dread beneath it all. Like the opener, Don't Stand So Close to Me, is about this weird sexual tension between a teacher and his student that I think sort of tonally leads into Bored to Tears, honestly, really fucking well and lends to that A to B sort of feeling that this record, I think, presents with the song, with Driven to Tears being a song that has a little more energy to it. It sort of takes the build from Don't Stand So Close to Me, the big iconic single from this album, and lets it dance a little more vibrantly while staying in that seedy disgust and more sort of funneling it through a feeling of disgust on the atrocities in the world. It's an interesting sort of like intimate moment widened out immediately that I think creates for a good two-piece that then I think, again, glides well into when the world is running down. You make the best of what's still around. That sort of bleak, downtrodden, and sort of disgusted internally mood getting pivoted out a little more aggressively through the eyes of Canary in a Coal Mine, another great single from this era that I think also carries some nice potent energy with its little fluttery guitar line, which that mood sort of gets played with the listener throughout this A to B journey, but I don't think amidst its twists and turns does it feel like unnatural. You know, while you've got this back and forth throughout Canary in a Coal Mine and Voices in My Head into the more positive Bombs Away, the mood of Bombs Away still feels like it's dancing in the realms that it's been in before, and I like how they even take a little bit of a pseudo-postmodern jab at, like, simple songwriting after that with the do-do-do-da-da-da-da, which isn't my favorite Police single, and is admittedly, like, one of the moments that, like, yeah, I think it's cute, but, like, it's not going to be my favorite moment on a record that does have the highs that this has, and it could be, and I would say would be a part that sets it down. Also, there's a few moments that, like, I think could do with a little more in the case of some of the ideas they did on Ghost in the Machine. Like, on Man in a Suitcase, that's a great dub jam that I think just needs a little more going on. For where they were taking their sounds and really trying to build a stage around their small unit, there's some moments where they successfully do make a bigger world, and some where it feels like they could, admittedly, maybe do a little more. But I at least dig the vibes of the song. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad song. I'm just speaking comparatively to their discography. I also like how they play with some more paranoid, darker ideas, like on the really dreary Paranoid Behind My Camel, a song that admittedly I was exposed to through the realms of Tech 9 before hearing it with the Police, and the first time I had heard it fucking sent me.
And I never paid for no check to thrust.
Or throughout some of the sleek grooves of Shadows in the Rain. It helps sort of like tailor the mood in a way that sort of lets some of the downtrodden ideas that they were sort of spitting in the face of really get a grounding before the album sort of ends. But I really appreciate what this record's got going on. I think that, like, if you enjoy the sounds from records like Synchronicity and you want to hear sort of like the initial toying with those sonic ideas, Zenyatta Mondatta is the place to go. I think it's a great stepping stone record in the discography, and in your regard, you know, like I said, I think you should listen to the discography as it's laid out. But if you're wanting to dip anywhere else, I would maybe start here and go in either direction if you like some of the sounds here and you want them a little raw and more infused with some punk inspo. Listen to the first two albums. If you want to see them continue the pilgrimage from here, listen to the last two albums. It is, in essence, a great middle piece in any discography that is 5 records. It is the quintessential version of that. They just danced around this era with some true magic, in my opinion. Rehumanize yourself. Rehumanize yourself. Rehumanize yourself. I was honestly torn between this record and the next record, and in spite of me feeling differently about 3 years ago on these two records, I think between that time and this, I've sort of shifted the balance back to putting Ghost in the Machine underneath the number 2 record. If only because I love what the next record does with scale and scope more, but I love the sonic backdrop of Ghost in the Machine. I also think it is paced wonderfully. I honestly think if there is an underrated record in the Police discography, it is Ghost in the Machine. It feels like the alternate universe expansion on their debut. It has this youthfulness to it, and uses their sort of love of aggression and that sort of post-punk inspiration to create some good energetic jams that feel tangential to the avenues they were doing just an album prior. You know, and that's not just in the seedier sounding Demolition Man, which I think has just a tasty fucking both bass lick and guitar riff. But the pocket of Rehumanize Yourself and One World, Not Three creates this optimistic sort of canon amidst this sort of downtrodden world that parts of this record sort of dance around in, especially on records like Too Much Information and Invisible Sun. There's a desire for optimism amidst some of the sadder realms and the yearnful realms that this album aims for, that feel very classic Police, especially, which also kind of lend to the feeling I was talking about. I'm feeling like an expansion more from the first album than the 2 records it's sort of following up. But it sort of takes some of that peers into the world that happened on Zenyatta and bring them back down into a bit of rounded out sonic world, so to speak. You know, Hungry for You sounds like a song that could have existed on Regatta de Blanc, but has the polish that was very much a part of the rounding out on the sounds of Zenyatta Mondatta that I think bring it into a world all its own. That paired with that along with that great sax line that I think, again, just gels well with the groove they got going on in that track. I also love how tracks like Omega Man and the closer Darkness play with space in the same way that Zenyatta Mondatta did, but again, just do so a little more harmoniously with the rest of the track listing that I just, again, absolutely adore. It shows the band growing and adapting in a way that I love, even if they are further branching out in some avenues that I also think, again, they just crush when adorning. I really love this record. Similarly to Zenyatta, I think this kind of feels like a stepping stone record of sorts. I feel like if you love the first album and you've never spun any of their late album records, spin Ghost in the Machine. It feels much more rooted in one lane than the two records around it, but I think that where it takes those branches out in the next record ultimately are what set it above this in hindsight. The other interesting thing, a note I wanted to bring in up when talking about Ghost in the Machine is that on DSPs, there's like an alternate version of it, which has like a different track listing, some B-sides in the realm of A-sides and the like, and I'd never thought to redact this album, because again, I think it's a really concise, well-constructed experience like the rest of their records, but this does present the question to mind, which is better and which I prefer more. It does create a different kind of A to B experience and has some interesting inverses, like Darkness is in the first run of the record, and the album more focuses on an ambient build a la what they were doing on Zenyatta Mandata, but I honestly don't know how I feel about it. Some of the other songs that they include, like I Burn For You and Once Upon a Daydream, also help add to that more new wave inspiration that feels like less of a focus on the original Ghost in the Machine, but I don't wholly miss. Like, I think that the songs that they have in the alternate sequence are good, and I think that there's some interesting moments that do happen across the record, like the stretch of One World, Through Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, really more feels like a bigger, more optimistic canon, and I kind of see what they're going for with this different sequencing on the record, and maybe it's because I've had more time with the original, like it's the copy that I own, that like I prefer it more. I didn't include it in this ranking because it's not the original version, but it did open the door to like talking about the sequencing on the album a little bit differently, and it kind of got me inspired to like maybe do a redact on it someday. I really love the original. I think this alternate version is also really, really cool. I think if you want to see a world where Zenyatta Mandata was more of the focus on the sort of sonic building the band was sort of concocting throughout Ghost in the Machine, I would listen to the alternate sequence. It's not bad. I just don't know if I like it more personally. I'd love to know what you think if you do, though.
Because it's murder by numbers. 1, 2, 3. It's as easy.
Synchronicity really does take some of that love of, tangent and experimental excursion and runs the gamut with it, so to speak, though, in a way that I think creates this explosive finale for this band's catalog. It feels like the band still firing in perfect harmony, but in a way that feels so segmented from each other, if that makes any sense. Synchronicity ultimately takes the band's evolution and puts it in some of the most extreme instances in a way that almost seems like it's trying to illustrate the chasm of personality that had grown between the members of the group. Songs like Walking in Your Footsteps and King of Pain, for as great as they are, really feel like they're showing the band's evolution at its farthest point, while songs like the Synchronicity two-piece try to still lean in those realms more so, but blend them in with glimpses of the Police's sound. It creates this sort of experience when listening to this where it feels like the band is sort of finding themselves drifting back down to square one when starting at some farther extremes, in a way that I think creates an experience that I would say I honestly like more than the just unified consistency of Ghost in the Machine as the years have gone on. The songs that show them more playing to their hits, so to speak, in the veins of like Tea in the Sahara or Oh My God, also just bring those reggae worlds and let them shine with the same sort of sheen they had done throughout their career thus far, while also sitting within the world that this record has been painting just as eloquently. Even with an oddity like Mother, which further cements the band as being the most new metal, new wave band by having a meltdown that only Disturbed could love and try to take inspiration from. But that moment of madness helps to carry the listener through this world of comfort. Oh My God and Miss Grodenko feel like Police cuts through and through, if not a little more tangentially personal than some of the worlds of emotion and gravitas the band typically does dance in. while not maybe being what I would say the best starting point for getting into the Police, it does have some wonky portions that I could see being a sort of weird rug pull, so to speak, for a listener. But I feel like, again, if you're buying into the Police's sound and you've gone through the journey of their discography, I think that Synchronicity is at least an interesting avenue that they explored and, again, successfully illustrated that I think is well worth any listener's time. And feels like the nice poetic ending, a la like your codas, so to speak, by Led Zeppelin. You know, while they take their time to branch out, play the hits, and grow in the likes of Wrapped Around Your Finger and the closer Murder by Numbers. Even in the closer Murder by Numbers, it feels like the band is lyrically waving goodbye after taking you through an audible version of their potential creative turmoil that I think is similarly to what I praised about the last Japandroids album last year, the Police's version of the band working through their send-off and problems to give the band its due close. And the Police discography feels incomplete without it. So it is as important as any other record in the discography, and still well worth your time. I just don't think it's a good starting point. When it comes to sophomore outings, though, showing a band understanding what they liked about making music together in the first place and trying to follow up that initial spark, Regatta de Blanc is a phenomenal version of that. Right down just the title, being aware, you know, it's white reggae. And I think that, like, their excursions on expanding on especially the more reggae and less punk, but still keeping that punk energy woven throughout this is where the magic of this album really lies. You know, it's still got its evolutions on Outlands d'Amour, like on It's Alright For You, and obviously the big song from this, Message in a Bottle, feels like the purest growth from those roots in the cleanest way. I really love that song, obviously, but I also think the sort of guitar and drum relationship on Death Wish is a nice sort of side tangent from those roots in a way that I think adapts it in a nice little nugget of a song. And if we're talking whirlwind energetic moments, No Time This Time is the dazzling outro that a record like this really needs, especially when it's got the methodical, slower build-up that it has through the lenses of the slide-in from The Bed's Too Big Without You through the piano-driven Does Everyone Stare. When it comes to that reggae influence, too, the title track, while very straightforward and kind of simple, I love that style of it more than on like da-da-da-da-da-da. And I gotta say, when it comes to sequencing, the way that this record dances with those energies, like on the debut, but splits them up, leads to some great moments, like on It's Alright For You, giving way to the just chill, serene love of the night that is Bring On the Night, another personal favorite song in this style that the Police have made. I also like how they take that love of the not-so-serious side of punk and flip it on a track like On Any Other Day. There's just a core of this record that doesn't feel like the band sort of spreading themselves too thin in certain realms. It's just as tight of a release as a record like Ghost in the Machine, but it excels above in the ways that it keeps some of that raw sound that I like from Outlands, but would have just loved to have seen refined a bit more. And think that it is on here. I think that if you aren't starting with Outlands, you should start with Regatta. I do think you should listen to Outlands, though, because it is a fantastic debut. I just, again, think that they followed up masterfully in spades with Regatta de Blanc. I don't own it, but I absolutely would love to have it, because I think that it is a hell of a good spin that feels like a good juggling of getting steeped in one's own emotions and trying to learn to not take yourself too seriously, in a combination that I think really works for this band, and they should have maybe kept more on the mindset, the latter, when it came to where the sort of artistic conflict would stew with the band, but I digress. Those are my thoughts on the Police and their discography. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts on the Police, the band, in the comments down below. If you like this, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on. Thank you again so very much for watching the Silent Vow Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.